I never thought a random comment on a language learning app would change my life. It was one of those evenings when I couldn't sleep, so I opened Hello Talk just to practice my rusty Spanish. I wasn't expecting anything serious, just small talk, maybe some cultural exchange. But then she replied her name was Lucia and she lived in Madrid. At first, it was purely about language. She corrected my grammar gently. I helped her with English idioms. She was curious about everything, why I liked certain expressions, what winter felt like in my country, what kind of food I grew up with. Her messages always had this warmth, a spark that made me forget the time difference. A week turned into a month. Our conversations grew longer and deeper, no longer about verbs or vocabulary. We talked about childhood memories, our families, our dreams. She'd send me voice notes, her accent soft and musical, and I'd replay them like songs. I didn't notice it happening at first, but somewhere between all those late-night exchanges, I realized I was falling for someone thousands of kilometers away. It started with text, but words on a screen eventually weren't enough. One night, after weeks of hesitation, Lucia asked, "Would you like to call?" I remember my heart racing as I stared at the screen. I said yes before my mind could catch up. The first call lasted almost 3 hours. I was nervous at first, my accent felt heavy, and I worried about sounding silly, but her laughter melted that away. There was this small moment when we both tried to speak at the same time, stopped, and laughed. It was awkward, but perfect. From then on, we talked almost every evening. I'd make coffee in the middle of the night, just to stay awake for her. Sometimes the connection would drop, and we'd both groan dramatically like it was the end of the world. She started teaching me Spanish slang, and I tried and failed to teach her how to pronounce my city's name. After 6 months, we decided to meet in person. I still remember waiting at the arrivals gate in Madrid. I was terrified she'd see me and feel disappointed somehow that maybe the chemistry was just online magic. But when she spotted me and ran into my arms, all that fear dissolved. We spent that week exploring her city, getting lost in narrow streets, sharing tapas, and laughing at how often I mixed up embarazada and embarrassed. When I flew home, the silence on the plane felt unbearable. It was the first time I understood what people meant when they say someone feels like home. It didn't take long for our differences to show themselves. At first, they were funny, like the time I showed up to a video call wearing a hoodie and she gasped dramatically, "You're wearing that inside." Apparently, in her family, indoor comfort clothes were sacred, sweaters and slippers only, no street clothes allowed. Food was another adventure. I once tried to cook a traditional Spanish tortilla following her grandmother's recipe. It ended up more like a scrambled potato disaster. She laughed so hard she nearly cried. Later, when she visited my country, I introduced her to our soups and dumplings, and she made the cutest face trying to pretend she liked the sour cream. But some differences weren't so easy. She came from a very expressive culture, lots of physical affection, passionate debates, quick emotions. I, on the other hand, was raised in a family where emotions were kept private. When we disagreed, she wanted to talk now, loudly and honestly. I wanted to step back and think quietly. That contrast caused tension more than once. Still, we learned, slowly. She began to understand that my silence didn't mean I didn't care, and I learned that her intensity was her way of showing care. Those small adjustments, those late-night apologies and awkward explanations were how we built our bridge. When I finally told my family about Lucia, I expected curiosity at worst, maybe mild surprise. Instead, I got a mix of disbelief and concern. My mother frowned and said, "You don't even speak the same language fluently. How can that work?" My father just sighed, muttering something about temporary internet infatuations. Even my closest friend joked that I was dating a time zone. Lucia faced her own share of skepticism too. Her parents were polite but distant when she mentioned me. Her mother once asked, why not someone closer, someone who understands our way of life? I could feel the weight of that question in every conversation afterward. At first, I tried to laugh it off. But it hurt how people could reduce something so real to a fantasy just because it didn't fit their idea of love. It made me doubt myself, and sometimes I'd project that doubt onto her. Were we being foolish? Was it really possible to build a life on late-night calls and plane tickets? But every time I started to spiral, Lucia would send me a message. No one else needs to understand it. Just us. That simple sentence grounded me. It reminded me that, for all the noise around us, what we had was quiet and steady, something worth fighting for. The distance started as a romantic challenge, something almost poetic. We'll make it work, we told each other. And for a while we did. But as months went by, the time difference began to feel heavier. There were missed calls, unanswered texts, and that strange ache of being online at the wrong moment. Sometimes she'd fall asleep waiting for me to finish work. Sometimes I'd wake up to a dozen messages from her that I couldn't reply to until the next day. We lived in two parallel worlds, connected only by a screen. Then came the loneliness. I'd see couples holding hands in the park and feel this pang, half jealousy, half sadness. Video calls were beautiful, but they couldn't replace touch. I missed the way she tilted her head when she laughed, the smell of her hair, the way she'd squeeze my hand in crowded places. We argued more often, mostly over small things, who forgot to message back, who sounded distant on the call. But underneath those fights was the same pain. We just missed each other too much. Still, even on the hardest nights, neither of us said we should stop. Instead, we promised to visit again. We started counting down days, marking them on our calendars like little lights in the dark. And somehow, that hope kept us alive. At some point, we realized that love wasn't enough. We needed plans. Hope alone couldn't hold us across continents forever. So we started really working to make someday happen. Lucia took extra hours at her job to save for flights. And I began studying Spanish seriously, not just as a hobby, but as a way to understand her world better. Every evening, I'd open my grammar books and she'd quiz me through video chat. We'd laugh when I mixed up words. Once, I accidentally told her grandmother that I was pregnant with Joy. That became a running joke for months. We learned to compromise. When her schedule was chaotic, I adjusted mine. When I got frustrated about visas and paperwork, she reminded me that bureaucracy wasn't stronger than love. Together, we made spreadsheets of deadlines, travel restrictions, even immigration options, proof that our relationship wasn't just emotional, but practical, something we were building with both hearts and hands. When we finally saw each other again, after almost a year apart, it was surreal. The airport reunion felt quieter than the first time. No running, no tears, just a long, wordless hug that said, "We made it this far." That week, we stopped being just a long-distance couple. We were partners, planners, teammates. Every small victory, every document approved, every flight booked, felt like we were writing our future one line at a time. It happened one evening after dinner at a small restaurant near Retiro Park. We'd been talking about everything and nothing, movies, travel, how much we both hated goodbyes. Then Lucia looked at me across the table and said quietly, "I don't want to keep leaving." For a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. I knew exactly what she meant. The endless countdowns, the packed suitcases, the tears at the gate, it was exhausting. We wanted a life, not a schedule of visits. That night, we made the decision I would move to Spain, not immediately, but for real. We started mapping out how language requirements, job options, visa processes, it felt terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When I told my family, the reaction was complicated. My mother tried to be supportive, but couldn't hide her fear. "You're leaving everything behind," she said, and she was right. My job, my friends, my familiar streets, everything would change. But every time I hesitated, I thought about her waiting at the arrival's gate, about the small way she reached for my hand when she laughed, and how, even across oceans, she made me feel known.
I'd apply for a long-term visa. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a real beginning.
Now, when I look back on how it all began with a random app, a few shy messages, and two people separated by thousands of kilometers, I'm amazed at how far we've come. We still face challenges every day. Some are practical, visa delays, paperwork, language barriers. Others are emotional, moments of doubt, homesickness, missing family traditions. But none of it feels impossible anymore. We've learned that love isn't a single moment of passion or a cinematic reunion. It's a collection of small choices, staying up late for one more call, sending a photo just to make the other smile, trusting that distance doesn't mean disconnection. It's building something sturdy out of uncertainty. My family has slowly come around. My mom even started learning a few Spanish phrases, and Lucia's parents have begun asking about me more kindly. We still have a long road ahead, but the resistance that once felt like a wall now feels more like a gate we've already started to unlock. We don't know exactly what the future holds. Maybe marriage, maybe a small apartment with plants and too many coffee mugs, but we do know we'll face it together. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that love across borders isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about believing that the heart can stretch across oceans and still beat in rhythm with another. And as impossible as it once seemed, we're proof that sometimes the world feels a little smaller when two people refuse to give up on each other. So, if someone had told me years ago that I'd fall in love with a person from another continent, I would have laughed. And it sounded romantic in theory, but unrealistic in practice. Now, I understand that long distance love isn't a fantasy. It's a test of patience, trust, and faith in something you can't always see. I've learned that communication is everything. In a regular relationship, silence can be comfortable. In a long distance one, silence can feel like absence. We had to learn to talk through everything: insecurities, frustrations, even the small daily details most couples take for granted. How was your day isn't just small talk. It's a thread that keeps the connection alive. I've also learned the beauty of vulnerability. When language and culture sometimes failed us, honesty bridged the gap. I stopped pretending to understand everything, and she stopped assuming I did. There's something profoundly intimate about admitting confusion and then finding understanding together. Maybe most importantly, I learned that distance can either shrink your love or strengthen it. For us, it became proof. Every choice to stay, every effort to connect, every long night counting down to the next reunion, it all meant something. It's not easy, but it's real. And that, I've realized, is worth everything. Being with Lucia didn't just teach me about love, it reshaped who I am. When you love someone from another culture, you don't just learn about them, you start to see the world through their lens. I began noticing how rigid my own routines were, how much I took normal for granted. Lucia's family taught me that dinner isn't just a meal, it's an event. You sit for hours, talking, laughing, passing plates around until you forget time exists. At first, I was restless. I kept checking the clock, thinking of what I needed to do next. But somewhere along the way, I stopped. I learned to stay present. She, in turn, learned from me the value of quiet moments, of reflection. She told me once that before meeting me, she never sat in silence without music or chatter. Now, she enjoys peaceful mornings, coffee in hand, just listening to the city wake up. Our differences didn't disappear. They softened. I started saying gracias and veo without thinking. She began teasing me, using words from my language. It was this gentle blending, two identities, learning to dance instead of collide. And through it all, I grew more patient, more empathetic. I realized that love across cultures isn't about losing yourself to fit another world. It's about expanding to make room for it. When I finally moved to Spain, the excitement lasted about 2 weeks. After that, reality settled in, slowly, then all at once. Suddenly, I was the foreigner, the one who spoke with an accent, who hesitated at cash registers, who smiled awkwardly when people laughed at jokes I didn't fully understand. I'd leave social gatherings exhausted, my brain aching from trying to translate everything in real time. Even small errands, buying groceries, mailing a letter, felt like small quests. Lucia was amazing through it all, patient and reassuring, but I could sense the weight on her too. Sometimes she'd feel guilty when I struggled, and I'd have to remind her that this was my choice, that I wanted to be here with her. And yet, there were nights when I missed home so much, it hurt physically. I'd crave the smell of my mother's kitchen, the sound of familiar streets, even the way people back home used sarcasm differently. I'd tell Lucia I was fine, but she could always tell when my voice got tight. She'd pull me close and whisper, "Mi casa es tu casa de verdad," and somehow it helped. Little by little, things got easier. I made friends, learned to joke in Spanish, even started craving her family's olive oil instead of butter. But homesickness doesn't vanish, it just becomes part of the story. I think that's what love across borders really means, carrying two homes in your heart and learning how to live in both. It took nearly a year before I stopped feeling like a visitor. The turning point wasn't some big moment. It was a series of small ones. One day I realized I no longer needed to translate every sentence in my head before speaking. Another day, Lucia's father called me Hijo for the first time, half jokingly, but it meant everything. And one night, walking home from work, I caught myself thinking in Spanish without noticing. It was strange, beautiful, but strange to feel my identity stretch like that. At the same time, I stopped trying to fit in perfectly. I began embracing the parts of me that were different, my accent, my traditions, my weird craving for foods no one here had ever heard of. Lucia loved that. She said, our relationship worked because we didn't try to erase what made us unique. We learned to celebrate it. We started creating a blend of our worlds. Some evenings, we'd cook both our cuisines, paella next to dumplings, and play playlists with songs from both countries. On holidays, we video called both families, switching languages mid-sentence, laughing at the chaos. That's when I realized balance isn't about choosing one home over another. It's about building a space between them, a shared middle ground that's entirely ours. And in that in-between, we found peace. Just when I thought we'd found our rhythm, life reminded us that love doesn't pause real-world problems. Living together brought a new kind of challenge. The small quirks that once felt cute across a screen, her habit of talking over me when she got excited, my tendency to withdraw when I was stressed suddenly became friction points. Add financial worries, work stress, and the never-ending dance of bureaucracy, and we found ourselves snapping at each other over things like unwashed dishes or missed calls. There were nights we went to bed angry, lying inches apart but feeling miles away. A part of me panicked, wondering if all we'd fought for was starting to unravel. But then, the next morning, she'd make coffee for both of us, push a mug toward me, and quietly say, "We'll be okay, right?" And somehow we always were. We started seeing a couples counselor, someone who specialized in intercultural relationships. It helped more than I expected. We learned that our conflicts weren't signs of weakness, they were growing pains. Two people, two languages, two worlds. It was bound to be messy sometimes. But every time we worked through something, we grew closer. Our love became less about perfect harmony and more about resilience. We began to understand that happily ever after isn't a single moment. It's a series of choices to stay, to listen, to keep building even when it's hard. The day we signed the lease for our first apartment together felt surreal. It wasn't big, just a cozy place on a quiet street with too much sunlight in the mornings, but to us, it was everything. It was ours. We spent the first week sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating takeout, and arguing playfully about where to put the bookshelf. Lucia insisted it should go by the window. I said it would block the light. In the end, we compromised. It went in the corner, crooked but perfect. It wasn't until I hung our photos on the wall, one from Madrid, one from my hometown, that I realized we'd actually done it. Two people who met by accident online had built a life together, one piece at a time. Our days weren't glamorous, but they were full. Morning coffee before work, evening walks in the park, calls to both families, sometimes switching languages mid-sentence. We even started talking seriously about marriage, not in the cinematic fairy tale way, but in the quiet, steady way that comes from knowing someone's soul. There were still obstacles, of course. Visa renewals, paperwork, the occasional pang of missing home, but now those challenges felt less like threats and more like proof of what we'd already overcome. When friends asked if I ever regretted leaving everything behind, I always said no. Because in truth, I hadn't left anything. I'd simply expanded my world to include hers. Sometimes I scroll back through our first messages, the clumsy grammar, the awkward jokes, the way we tiptoed around saying how we really felt. It's hard to believe that those shy exchanges became the foundation of the life we have now. If I've learned anything, it's that love doesn't always arrive in a convenient package. It doesn't always speak your language or live in your time zone. Sometimes it shows up halfway across the world and asks you to risk everything familiar for something uncertain but real. Lucia and I still face challenges. There are still moments when we misunderstand each other, when homesickness hits hard, when life feels complicated. But every time I look at her, I'm reminded why it's all worth it. Because this love, imperfect, hard-earned, and honest, has made me braver, softer, and infinitely more grateful. To anyone reading this who's in a long-distance or intercultural relationship, don't let the fear of obstacles drown out the beauty of connection. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it takes time and patience. But if both of you keep choosing each other again and again, the distance eventually becomes just another part of your story, not the end of it. Our story isn't finished. Maybe it never will be. But right now, as I sit here with her head resting on my shoulder, I know this much. We didn't just find love. We built it across borders, across doubts, and across every difference the world tried to remind us of. And that, to me, is what makes it real.